Welcome to the Torvus podcast. My name is Ari, and this is episode 11. And tonight we're going to tackle the best video games of all time. Jason, myself, and Alex will be discussing our top favorites of yesteryear and today. I'm sure we're going to have some discussion here. It's going to be interesting. So let's get into it. Episode 11, the video games. Welcome to the Torvus podcast, guys. Episode 11. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
So give me a quarter, man.
Do video games even cost a quarter anymore?
Depends.
Okay, so we're going to be talking our favorite video games of all time. And the interesting thing about this episode is we kind of, obviously we span a 30 to 40 year generational gap for what we were playing at the time, where I stopped, and obviously Alex picked up later, and he went on, and Jason's kind of at a different thing here. So we're going to be going around, and we're going to be talking about our top. We're not sure how many. We're going to say
top
5
X games. That's episode 11. We could
do 11.
Since we're not doing Spinal Tap for episode 11, we should maybe our top 11.
So you can't have a podcast which is about geek culture without talking about video games. And this is a very, very passionate thing for some people. As a note here, I don't play video games anymore. I used to, but I'm so involved with other things that I don't do it. However, I do have a love for them, and they are part of my life back in the 80s, big time. So
I still play it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so this is going to, I'm sure there's going to be some controversy here about, oh, you forgot that, and why didn't you put that? And so
that's what comments are for, folks.
Yeah, so we'll go for it. So Alex, I'm going to start with you. Mm-hmm. So again, generation difference, 20 plus years between you and I. So let's get into what you consider some of your best
And what
games.
do they call your generation? Just so people listening know where you're coming from.
It's millennials, but I'm
it's okay.
I've been categorized as a more mature for millennial. I've heard that once or twice before. I don't know if you've seen previous
small
episodes,
M
but
millennial.
yeah.
I think we're Generation X or something.
Irregardless.
Okay.
I'm going to get into it. Start things off here with my favorite series of all times, which is just such a good set of games. Is the Soul series is what it's referred to. Now, for me, that starts off, it's 4 games. The first game is Demon's Souls. Then the next series is the Dark Soul games. There's Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. And it is a phenomenal...
What are these games for?
They started with the PlayStation 3 and then ran through to the PlayStation 4. So I played the last Dark Souls.
When was the PlayStation games for?
So what year is this coming
The series began with the release of Demon Souls for the PlayStation 3 in 2009.
Okay.
Right? So it's new. It's new.
Yeah, that's why you're going to get the variety.
But for me, it's a video, and I've been playing video games since pretty much 1990, pretty much since I was born. I was part of that generation. And
right
to me, this is the top video game series. It's an action role-playing game developed by From Software, and it's from a Japanese creator. His name is Miyazaki, and he served as the director for each of them, except for Dark Souls 2, which there was a weird thing there. But it's a phenomenal game. It's ruthless. It's noted to be one of the hardest video games of all time.
If you're going to give us kind of a synopsis of what kind of game it is, what is it?
It's like a Diablo dungeon crawler type game. So it's a
quest game.
Yeah, so it's an RPG. It's a role playing game.
Okay,
and it's like third person view of your character.
Yep.
And essentially the story is very lucid. They don't really explain a lot of things, and the first thing you do in almost every game is die, and that's part of the game. And you're going to die hundreds of times. You're going to be destroyed by monsters that seem to be impossible to get past. You show up, you open a door, all of a sudden a fog gate appears behind you. You can't get through. You can't go back. you go forward, the ceiling will collapse. A monstrous demon about 150 times your size will fall from the ceiling and start smashing you with a club. If he hits you twice, you're dead. You have to hit him. You have to hit him about 10 times. You have to hit him about 10 times to put a dent in him.
Clearly, there's no quarters used for this game.
Oh no! And this is a console game, and it's a game that literally I don't even know what the number is, but I think I got the completion trophy for Dark Souls 3, and I think it's about 3% of all people who have purchased the game achieve this trophy because it is that difficult to dive into and to do all the bullshit that it puts.
So you utterly rock at this game.
It's fun. It's fun. Like there's a
no,
lot
but you're like clearly. You're
I'm into it. I'm into it, and and what's really fun is the multiplayer aspect. So if you were playing your game and you're going through your game, as long as you're online, I have the ability to invade your game. So I can choose to forcibly jump into your game with my character and fuck your shit up and kill you while you're fighting other monsters trying to get through the game. I can jump in and I can mess you up.
So it's a kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons type of thing?
It is very much a Dungeons and Dragons. It's very much that, your character goes through,
you level
up.
Third person? Is it top?
Third person. Okay. And you're getting gear to level up, but when you die, you lose all of your currency, your souls in the game.
And so this came out in 2009, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So every game is based on another game.
Right.
And then that game is based on another game.
Yes.
So let's turn back the pages of time here, Alex.
Yeah.
So what's your game called again?
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls. Okay. So in the year 1981, there was a game that came out called Ultima.
Right.
And guess what? It is a third-person top-down game.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragon-esque. But it also had a first-person perspective when you went into dungeons sometimes.
Right.
And this is a game which I consider part of my top 10 list of games all time. Now, the games that we're talking about here, so the listening audience probably is like, well, why didn't you mention Pac-Man or something like that? It's like, I was never into Pac-Man. I never liked the game. Even though it's probably considered one of the top 10 games of all time, we're talking about our favorites.
This Pac-Man's better than Pac-Man anyway.
Which it is, which I agree with that. So Ultima, the first Age of Darkness, which came out in the early 80s, again, it was one of those awesome, I put it into my IBM PC and my, what size was the disc, sir?
You're probably talking about 5 1/4.
Yeah, they were 5 1/4 discs, floppies. And you put in, you'd play the Ultima. And so it was an adventure game too. So the Ultima had an Ultima series, and absolutely loved it because it would be a quest game. You could build up your character. It would get progressively harder and things like that.
Cool. Not quite as cool as Wizardry, but pretty cool.
I never played Wizardry, but Ultima was my role-playing game that I used to play.
Right.
And one of the things I do remember is sitting, and I mentioned this before the mics came on, sitting in the den, my parents' den, and playing the game on the monochrome.
What color monochrome?
Mine was amber.
You had amber too. Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
We had amber.
Most people had green.
Mean. Okay, sorry. Just a pause. Millennial moment.
Okay,
Take a pause.
Before there were color TVs, there were black and white TVs. Before computer screens had all these fancy colors on them,
You had to
they
pick
were
a color.
black screen,
Yep.
and you had one color.
One color.
Green. You could have a green screen, so like the
Oh, so the letters
The
or whatever.
letters were
Whatever. It was
green?
black or green pixels. That was it.
Remember the Matrix?
Yes.
yeah.
That's what we're talking about. my
But
friend.
some of us rare people had amber instead of green.
So wait, how many options were there at the?
No,
One.
you could
One or
buy
the
a
other.
monitor
Oh.
that had green,
Or
you could
or
buy a
orange?
different monitor.
Yeah, or they had white too. But
Yeah.
Oh.
So the thing about the screens is, if you kept them on, you get screen burn. Do you know about that?
Yes. Well, like from stupid TVs that are ancient.
So that's the same thing. If you leave it on, and you'd have to turn it off because if you left on, you get screen burn. And that's why screensavers came out, because of screen burn.
move, right?
To move.
And
Yes.
there's so many cool. They look so cool. By the way, if you're using computers on Linux, there's a thing called Cool Retro Term. You can make your terminal totally look like one of these monitors from the 70s or 80s. Anyway,
So the thing about Ultima, I was playing on a monochrome amber screen, so it wasn't about the graphics and things like that. Obviously, it changed and got better over time, but you don't know what you don't know. At the time, it was about the adventure. It was
Exactly.
it was about the story.
Yeah.
And you get lost in it, and that's one of the reasons that Dungeons and Dragons was, it's using your imagination, and very cool. So that was mine, Ultima. Absolutely loved it, and I don't know if a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening probably know of it too. But Jason, that's going to lead into you. What do you got for us?
I've got tons of things. I could do a 3-hour show myself. But as we know, we try to keep me contained in this.
You've got 5 minutes.
In this format. Okay, so we're gonna go way back here.
Okay.
So one of my earliest favorite games, I'm going to go into the arcade era. There were buildings you used to have to go into to play games.
Yeah,
and put
they're cool now. I know what that
and I
is,
know they're
yeah.
kind of making a retro.
He saw this on Stranger Things.
Yeah,
he knows
yeah.
what an arcade is.
I've been to Quasars. I get it.
Yeah, so there was a type of game that was called vector games. It had vector graphics. So instead of another thing about not having color for the things, and they didn't have pixels. It was vectors, so these little lines that they made calculations around that would go there. So it was a game called Star Castle.
Okay.
And I used to have to go down. They only had one in town. It was at the Pop Shop, and you had to go down. So they had a pinball machine and the Star Castle game. I'd go down and get some RC Cola and play Star Castle. Great game. We have limited time here, so I won't get into explaining every game. I'll go for more games. You can look all the stuff up on.
So
the
what was the
internet.
genre of the game?
The genre of the game was spaceship shooter. You had this Star Castle, this thing in the middle of your screen, and then you had a little ship that had to go in and shoot at it, and there would be walls that are rotating around it that were shields, and you have to shoot them out, and then and destroy the thing in the middle, and it would shoot stuff on it. It's really primitive. Like this is a 70s.
Joystick and button?
It was super primitive, just buttons.
Just buttons.
Just buttons. You had thrust.
Yep.
And
Which would move you
and left or right.
forward,
you had thrust, so you could move your ship and you could fire.
But what the thrust
And
button
the
would
screen
move you,
wrapped, so you went off the top, you'd come onto the bottom of the screen,
and
so
then
you
you
could go
kept-
like really fast, and then if you'd hit the shield, you'd bounce off, but they'd be trying to shoot you at the same time. Anyway, it sounds really cheesy. You can look at the thing, but it was a really hard game.
What year did that
Got
come out, do
Really
you know?
intense. I didn't do the research
Okay.
on this, but it was early.
What year were you playing it?
This is like had to be late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. Cool.
It was one of the ones that before I was allowed to go to an arcade, this was one of the things that was in a place that you could have kids. It wasn't the bad place with the bad people that smoked
Right.
in it. Right? Arcades used to be like a seedy place that you weren't allowed, but this was one of the games that was in.
Got it.
There's ice cream parlors and stuff. But anyway.
Okay.
So to go back to your thing about the story, I think my favorite series of video games that ever took me on a journey, brought me into a quest, and really developed a world, a story, brought you in as a character, and allowed customization. So for me, customization is a big factor in video games. If you're going to play a video game and I'm going to play a video game, can I experience a different experience than you based off of our different play styles? My answer is I hope so. That to me is what makes a good game. In a lot of instances, right? There's always exceptions, but to me that's an important factor. And I think that no game has really done such a good job in providing you such an enriching story and allowing you customization than the Elder Scrolls series. So this is a series that dates way back, and to me, I'm going to talk specifically about
Way back.
Oblivion and Skyrim. So these games are, role-playing games, and again, it's very much like Dungeons and Dragons, but on a console or PC, right?
Right.
And so what console thing is this for?
The Oblivion was for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox, and
So that was the same sort of era as the last ones you're talking about?
Yes.
Early 2000s?
yes, and then but Elder Scrolls itself dates farther back. I'd have to do a little research there to find out exactly.
But the version when you were playing it.
Yeah, and that was early 2000s for me, and I started playing with Oblivion. And just total customization of character, class, very D&D setup. So your character would level up, but you could only increase the stats based on what you did. So if you went around punching people all day long, you only got better at punching people.
Right.
That's good
So
mechanic, yeah.
exactly. So
Interesting.
exactly. So you had your character develop based off of your
What you
playstyle.
actually did.
Yeah. So you would go around and do things, and then your character would get better based off of what you did. And that's not even the best mechanic that they had. What they really captured was the story, the depth that they brought you into with these quest lines. They would do insane things. They had their whole, you can go online and look this stuff up. They have the whole religion, the whole cult. It's the closest thing video game wise that I can think of to D&D that actually has that level of extensiveness behind it. It's fully formed. There's religions, there's subcategories, there's guilds. You can become a mage, you can become an assassin, the sky's the limit.
Right.
And you know,
Okay, so they really took wizardry
Yo.
that we were talking about before and
Yeah.
really turned
They
it up.
it is I think it's the ultimate RPG. Like Dark Souls has its own unique quirks and it's difficult, but like the Elder Scrolls games are the ultimate RPG if you're interested in getting lost in a fantasy world and developing a character, and if you just want to run around and be a wood elf in the woods, you can do that, and you have hours of gameplay just doing that.
Yeah, obviously the worlds of these games have expanded, that they're massive.
You can play 140 hours, and that's like you're into it, but that's scratching the surface. You know what I mean?
And I had heard like a statistic at some of these games that you could literally walk your character for like days and days, and you wouldn't hit the other side of the map. That's how massive these things are.
That's the newer games now. Yeah, absolutely.
It shows how
That,
far
yeah.
it's come since the super simplistic games of the 70s, where like I say you're wrapping the map with one little thing that can only do two things.
Or in Ultima, you'd
two
walk and all of a
things
sudden
in
you
your
just
whole
couldn't walk
world.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I guess there's nothing out there.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like about Oblivion is it's still like it's not that technologically advanced. Like the map still has borders, you can still get around, but the detail and the story is very D&D. The characters that you're interacting with, there's for a specific example, you join the Assassin's Guild, you progress. One of your quests, the head assassin is telling you have to assassinate every other member of your guild. And you have to learn about every person in your guild. And so you've progressed along and you become friends with certain people, or you've made enemies of certain people. So people who you've done quests for or haven't done quests for may like or dislike you, and you'll either have information or won't have information. For example, there's a vampire. You find out he has a rare allergy to garlic, because not all vampires in Elder Scrolls have a weakness to garlic, but this guy does. So you can put garlic, you can go get garlic and put it in his inventory if you have a high enough pickpocketing skill, and then he becomes weaker, and then you can kill him.
That's very cool.
Nice.
I like that.
There's subtleties in the game that are so D&D that it blows my mind. So that to me is why Elder Scrolls sets apart from the rest, because I think they really put a lot of time into the optional bonuses that you can do to really role play the game.
Nice.
So going from kind of that D&D era, we're going to fast forward to contemporary times. And I'm going to talk about a game which was my favorite, I'm going to say flight simulator game. So I had a game which was called Flight Simulator, which is basically you would play
Old
to learn.
Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Yeah, however,
Classic.
I hated it. I absolutely hated it because it was very difficult. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like joystick up, you'd fly. There was all these things you had to do.
Right.
And they actually used Flight Simulator as a basis for flight simulators.
So before you fly, you'd have to like power up this, do this check, do
All these
that,
buttons.
like, yeah.
Very complicated. So I had it for my original IBM, but I never played it. And then in 1986, a game came out called Gunship. And it was made by a company named Microprose.
Microprose, awesome game company.
Yes. They made a lot of games.
Some of the best games ever made.
So Gunship is it's a combat flight simulator, and it's developed and published by Microprose in 1986, like I said. Now, in the game, you're controlling a simulated AH-64 Apache attack helicopter. Amazing, right?
Were you playing this at the same time you're watching like Airwolf and Blue Thunder?
Yeah, and that's why it was so cool. Because so the players would navigate through missions, and they would attack enemy targets, and they would protect friendly forces. It was very, very popular. And I just remember it's like, oh, are you going to use your minigun? And it's like, oh, are you going to use your Hellfire missiles? It was awesome. And remember, I'm playing this thing on the amber monochrome screen,
Right.
And you're sitting there like you're in the cockpit, and so you're moving around.
Wireframe.
So very, very, it was newer, right?
Yeah.
And the tanks themselves, it was more than wireframe. Well, the cockpit was, but the tanks, you could see the tanks, and you'd have your little heads-up display, and very cool. So Gunship was definitely up there for one of my favorite flight simulator games.
But
of all
also
time.
cutting edge. Like it also like broke the mold a bit in terms of taking it and making it a game as opposed to an actual simulation.
Yeah, and one of the neat things is it got me totally into the Apache helicopter. And I remember I have an old poster that I'd put up in my room. So I was about 12 years old at the time, and it was a big poster of an Apache just coming like straight towards the camera.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Loved it. So
Awesome.
The Gunship game, very cool. So I'm going to put that in my top 10 of favorite games of all time.
Cool. I've never played that one.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I'm gonna get into the newer games later. I'll start with the super old stuff for the contrast here. There were so many really good games in the old arcade days. One of my favorites was Missile Command. It had a kind of control that you don't see very much anymore, if at all. Trackball.
Yeah, trackball.
So it's one of those games that's really hard to replicate and play on other things. Although the Atari Flashback Mini actually does a good job, even though the controllers are different, you can still still play that to this day.
You're talking about the Pong thing, like the little ball that you just
It's a roller.
Yeah,
It's a roller.
like the mouse that they used to release that
Yeah.
had like a ball
Yeah.
in the middle
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's what the thing is. Like the arcade cabinet had this ball here,
Yeah.
and then the little buttons that you'd press, right?
Okay.
There's only two games I can think: Missile Command and Centipede.
What about Pong? Pong, definitely. You had to scroll the wheel. Side
Well,
to
see,
side.
when I played Pong. So this is clear. I'm going on tangent, but I played Pong with a paddle.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
okay,
you
that's
had the
probably old
Atari
school.
with the paddle?
Yeah, or the Intellivision. So that's how I remember Pong.
Whereas I
Interesting.
remember it with, we had a thing that had the dials to do
Yeah.
the
So
Pong.
we all
Yeah,
got
it's the
different
paddle.
Pongs.
No, like seriously, there's a million different ways to do Pong. If you watch the people who collect video games and are really into video games, there is literally thousands.
I think we just got to do an
variations of
honorable mention to Pong because that like,
We've
that
all
is
mentioned
definitely
it.
not
Yeah.
on all of our lists,
Yeah.
but we brought it up. So.
Okay, so Missile Command.
okay.
Shout out to Pong.
Missile Command, basically, it's one of these games that's like super simple,
Mm-hmm.
and it does have color on the screens, and the colors move and stuff. But
More than one color.
more than one color on the same screen. It's like, whoa, we're getting into super high tech here. But it was one of those games, again, very simplistic games, but really challenging games. Even if you play it now, it's really hard to do. So basically what's happening is you've got these nuclear missiles falling down from the sky. On the bottom of the screen, you've got a bunch of cities that you have to defend. You shoot your missiles up into the air, they explode, and you're trying to blow up the missiles before they land on your cities.
Gotcha.
Again, sounds super simple. You can watch it and go, oh, this is kind of cheesy. But you try to play it, and it's like, oh my God, this is so hard. Those old games, whether it's Missile Command, Asteroids, Defender, Robotron 2084, whatever, those games are like super simple, but they're really, really hard.
But the funny thing
actually
about
play.
Missile Command is I remember it too, and it always reminds me of a particular movie,
Oh, War Games.
War Games. Now, War Games, they didn't have Missile Command per se, but they
Right.
did have a screen. They had a shot there at the end where the missiles are coming down in NORAD, and they're showing the simulation. He did everything by text. If you remember Matthew Broderick, he's typing in. It's like, let's blow up Seattle.
It's like the hacker game, the original hacker movie kind
Yeah,
of thing.
but Missile Command that came out in 1980 in the arcade version, and then I believe is the Atari 2600 in 1981. That's when it came
Yeah,
out.
it's
for
made
that.
lots of different versions,
Yeah.
but like for my money for playing it right now, there's a thing called the Atari Flashback Mini.
Okay.
And it's a little handheld thing, and the controls on it somehow actually work, even though it doesn't have a trackball. The play actually works out pretty well for it, surprisingly.
Interesting.
So I do play video games still, but some of them are old by lots of standards.
Cool. I'm gonna throw to my old. I'm gonna go shoot
here
into
we
my
go.
next
There we go.
old
Going to
game.
old
Here's my
school. We're gonna go
old
back.
school.
We're gonna go way
back to 1981.
Whoa.
With the release of Galaga, and to me,
Dude,
that,
was your dad born?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's how I got introduced to it because my dad is not into video games whatsoever, but he loves old school arcade games. It's got to have the toggle and the buttons. That's all you can handle. So. And he took me to these places, and we'd go and we'd do the quarters, the whole thing. And it was not something that a lot of people my age got to experience at that young
There's something
of an age.
nice about being in an arcade. It's a different experience.
And I have to hearken because Galaga is essentially a game where you're this little spaceship flying, and all you can do is move left or right and shoot, and you're at the bottom of the screen, and then these alien bugs basically kind of fly in.
It's an upgraded Space Invaders.
Yeah, and they're at the top of the screen, and then they shoot little things down, and all you're basically doing is avoiding their bullets and shooting them, and you just go through the game. Man, was that a challenging thing to grasp. And I grew up playing video games and using full controllers and all these buttons, but left, right, and shoot can be tough.
It can be tough.
Because it speeds up.
Yeah, and they showed that to me and made it very apparent. And I used to see my dad, and he'd crush it, and you get the ship stolen, and you get 2 ships, and it was
so good.
Yeah,
and
it gets sucked in by the and it gets pulled up. And
The tractor beam.
and that's where it gave me a very healthy respect from and obviously this isn't even the
but that's
the beginning, but still
that's pretty
early video games, and just it doesn't have to be about flashy graphics and a whole in-depth
Just
story
good gameplay
to get something out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I also have to do an honorable mention too, as a sidebar there, to Burger Time, because that one many hours spent on that, and I that's my dad's
Yeah.
probably go-to game. I can't hold a candle to that, but I have to do a shout out to my dad and to Burger Time.
Oh no,
for sure.
those are good, definitely good taste because, like I said, that Galaga comes from Space Invaders, which is like one of the earliest games, and then there was like Galaga and Galaxian and Gal Plus. My favorite arcade game was actually Gyrus that I had the top score, and it was basically Galaga plus a game called Tempest combined. So instead of being on the bottom of the screen, you had the ships coming from the top or the middle, and you could go around the outside. You could go around the outside. You could go around the whole screen and shoot them where they came.
So this is an interesting thing about we're talking about this particular game. So I pronounce it Galaga.
Right.
However, I just looked it up, and you were pronouncing it correct.
Galaga.
Yeah, Galaga, basically
did I say?
Galaga. You both are saying the correct
Galaga,
version.
yeah.
I think a lot of people say Galaga,
Yeah.
and that's not it.
Maybe
So
it depends where you're from.
yeah, maybe, but that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. It was published. The game was published by a company called Namco in Japan.
Namco.
Yeah, so
And
good. I love
it was also published in North America by a gaming company called Midway. And
Midway did a lot of good games. Midway Electronics.
Yeah, that came out in 1981.
Oh yeah, they did Defender and did they do?
Defender, yeah.
No,
I think
that was
no, I think
Williams
so.
Electronics.
Oh, really?
Anyway, we can look that up. Sorry, it's been a long time.
So Galaga was released in September of 1981.
Yeah.
And I remember that game. That's actually in one of my top favorite games too. Anytime I went to the arcade, I'm like, I want to play.
And you can still play that.
Oh, it's
today.
still like we have
Actually, there's a place
new
in town. We'll
arcade
talk
place
about
that
that
just opened up.
after we're off the
Yeah.
thing. But I also wanted to say about those two things that you just mentioned there. Burger Time's a great game too. Like a little bit of the Dane's Dungeon-y kind of thing, the cool shit, bullshit. Burger Time is a really cool game with really great gameplay. Now, one of the overrated games is the whole Mario, the early Mario games,
Yeah.
that they get all this glory and credit and stuff. And Burger Time does the same kind of concept, but it's a better game than the early Mario games, I think. So I think those are good choices for good taste.
Thank you. Yeah, going back, but still, I
So-
pay tribute appropriately.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw some trivia for the Galaga fans out there. So, in 1996, they did a poll of the top 100 games of all time, according
be in
to
there.
it's according to the Next Generation list, and Galaga ended up being number 96 on that list. So it is in there. Think about how many hundreds of thousands of games there are.
That's true. Yeah.
So here's the piece of trivia I'm going to throw at you, Alex. The world record for the highest score in Galaga was set in October of 2018
Wow.
by a guy named Armando Gonzalez in Los Angeles. And he scored, you ready for this? He scored 17,684,50 points based on marathon settings. Then in February 7th, 2019, Mike Thompson of New Hampshire achieved the world record score of 6,679,190 points in a much harder tournament setting. The rapid fire settings, which was held by a guy named John Kinkle in Battle Creek, he had a score of 3 million. So you can imagine how long you'd have to play and how fast things would go.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like,
think it almost
really.
comes down to memory at that stage because things kind of there's an algorithm. There's a way to
Yeah.
figure out the game at that stage and to kind of flow through
Yeah,
it.
so you almost need to have your trained reflexes.
You need to just do it 1,070
Yeah, it's like
million
Rubik's Cube.
times.
Yeah, the algorithm.
Yeah.
Or when they're playing like Guitar Hero and they put it behind their back and
Yes.
they do all those.
Because at this point when this star comes up, you're doing this or that, right? Like there's certain. It's like the Dance Dance Revolution, right? Like the same
Exactly.
kind of thing where you're like, okay, this is the point. Obviously the games can kind of throw a little bit of randomness at you, but you can start to figure them out.
That goes back to Dragon's Lair.
Yeah, we might have to talk about that. So one of the other things about Galaga, it appeared in the movie. It was in War Games in 1983. It was also in The Karate Kid in 1984.
Avengers!
It was in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And of what Alex just said, it appeared briefly in 2012's Avengers. Upon entering S.H.I.E.L.'s helicarrier, Tony Stark catches an agent playing Galaga and
That
remarks,
guy's playing Galaga."
that man's playing Galaga.
Yeah.
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
Yeah, so good.
Still worth
So
playing.
good.
Some of these, that's the thing is, good games are timeless games that you can still play them today. even if they're super old. The gameplay is what is most important.
Yeah, it totally is. So that's going to move on to one of my favorite modern games, quote unquote, because Alex is like, oh, modern, like
Modern.
This is 2017 we're
before
talking about,
2000
right?
or
Like,
after 2000?
well, I don't know. So
I'm like, is it after 1990 or before?
technology. If it's a week old, then it's old news, right?
So in the mid 90s, there was a game that came out which was called Mech Warrior.
Mech Warrior. Nice.
And I don't know if you're familiar with it, Alex.
I've never heard of it.
Okay, so Mech Warrior is based on the Battle Mech series. So basically you're in... Yeah, BattleTech and Battle Mech series. And you're basically in an armored vehicle. You sit inside of it.
Okay.
You actually got to sit inside one of these?
No.
Oh,
No. It's the video game.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Right?
No, okay, no, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so and then you sit inside and you're basically you maneuver them and they look like robots that have missiles on them. Do you know what I'm kind of talking about?
There's many new games that have come out with that same kind of they call them mech suits.
And that's what they're all based on.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
They're all based on there was a role playing game called BattleTech. Role playing / board game.
So
yes, absolutely.
Stuff like that,
Yes,
right?
I
And
know
then
exactly
Mech Warrior, it's like Mech Warrior Online, but I never got into that. So when it came out during that time, that's what I was totally into because you could customize your armored vehicle. You could add missiles. You could get small ones. You could get big ones.
LRMs, SRMs.
Yeah, and it was amazing because it was kind of like how you could upgrade. And so it wasn't just this is what you're given. It's like what.
So you probably had like all the stock mechs and Battle Masters.
Yeah,
and
as
Locusts and
exactly.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
it's so good. So you remember that game?
Well, that one I never got to play because that's one of these newfangled ones. But like I say, there was a board game / role playing game called BattleTech, and then they came out later with early PC games. Like I remember playing BattleTech Crescent Hawk's Revenge. Great game. That had to be in like the early 90s or something. I'd have to look these things up.
Right.
I remember playing that. And of course, it's early PC games. So at the time, it was just blown away by how cool the graphics were. But I remember seeing some of these later ones, and there was some convention where people had it where it wasn't like the mech didn't walk around, but you had a thing that you could get into.
Oh, you could actually get into it.
Get into a thing, and it was like super cool. I never got to play those, but
So the newest one, I don't know. It might be a year or two out of date at this point, but it's called Anthem.
Okay.
That's exactly. You get into these mechs, and it's an MMORPG, like a massive multiplayer, online role playing game.
Right.
So
there's
you not
some
only
people
you
last
level
year that were
up,
talking
and
about
you
that.
have a class, and you gather your buddies, and you go through and you jump into these suits, and there's different classes, and so you play like either like the more tanky version or the light version, or then
you got
there's
a
like
tank version.
They call them a tank, like it's the big missiles,
But it's
high health,
probably like a grav tank.
high damage, slow moving, that kind of thing,
Right.
right? So anyway, these games, they still evolve, but that for me, that's Anthem. That's the new version of what you're talking
Cool.
about.
So that's like the because it's like the BattleTech company that did it was FASA,
Yeah.
gaming company, and they came out with another game called Renegade Legion, which was basically the Roman Empire in space, and they had some cool video games. It was mainly a board role playing game, but they had cool video games of that too. And one of them had like grav tanks that you could use, and there's Interceptor, Leviathan, Centurion was a tank.
Yeah, see, they had names. Yeah, it was very cool.
Really cool stuff.
And actually, I think we need to kind of pause for a second. And this is kind of, I don't know if this is going to be a slight Dane's Dungeon moment of a total bullshit thing that you had mentioned, I think last week or the week before. And we're talking about the evolution of games.
Right.
Initially, when they came out, it was you and a machine, and you would play.
Yep.
And then it would be like, it was you, your machine, you could use your dial-up modem, and you could meet someone, you could kind of adventure.
CivNet.
Right? You could
Yes.
venture together.
Yeah, I know what you're
And
talking
then they
about.
came out with consoles where you could sit in a room with your buddies and play split screen.
4-player
Or four.
4-player, or do a LAN party, and you could do like up to 16 people if you had enough consoles, and then split that off of 4. It was
Right.
phenomenal. You could have birthday parties, invite all your friends,
Yeah.
and like game out on a couple. Like you could put TVs on, like, and do
Different
that.
places,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Now, then it changed to kind of again,
But
right?
It
comes
got
in-
fucked up. It got
But it
fucked
comes
up.
in waves.
Yeah,
But now gaming is messed up. Gaming went backwards. So I grew up in what I would call the golden age of gaming.
Didn't we all?
Where, well, I mean, console gaming is a fantastic thing. I grew up with me and my buddies. We would go out. We did, I lived in a suburban area. We had like the cookie cutter houses, and we all, and we'd all go out and we'd play like street hockey during the day. And then when the sun set, we'd go into, my buddy's house and we'd all play. We all had different ones. So we'd all play on his Xbox, and we play whatever Halo or whatever it was. All of us split screen. The four of us would all play on his thing. Then we go over to my other buddy's house, and he had the Nintendo, and then we'd go to my house, and I had the PlayStation. So we'd all get to experience all these different. It was like we all had our own arcades in our house, but except the arcade wasn't just you all stand around and watch one person play. It was you could all play at the same time. When they came out with those arcade games where it was like instead of just the one toggle and button, you'd have the two.
Or 3 or 4.
The console is like the ultimate version of that. It's like one thing where you all have your own controller and you're all playing. Now the new games, so the Xbox One and the PS4, while you can have the option to connect 4 controllers if you're stupid, no game supports that multiplayer aspect.
So you can only play multiplayers that are in other places. So you can't have 4 guys.
For example, Dark Souls.
We couldn't be sitting around.
Dark Souls, like I said,
together.
my favorite game, and like one of the things I'm going to call total bullshit on Dark Souls is you cannot. I have the game. You can't come over, and we both can't play Dark Souls. But if you got a copy of Dark Souls and played it on your PlayStation at home,
because they want to sell one to each person
and play with each other.
Interesting.
On separate like consoles with our own devices. So it's a marketing strategy that they came up with now, and they literally drive it home like, and it's beyond like the TV screens are so massive nowadays. You could split that motherfucker into like 18 pieces, and it would be the same as when I used to play on as a kid by myself.
Wow.
And it's not compatible.
But Alex, wouldn't it be better if you have your own TV screen so you'd have a full screen, you're playing, and your other players playing in the other room? And
but you should have the option.
But we should be able to have your buddies over to your house.
Like if you had 4 people, you should be able to play on a quarter of the screen each, or have a screen that combines all of you, or have 4 different screens. It should be your kind of choice. I mean,
the fact that they restrict you. So nowadays, like my friends and I grew up in that generation, and I still make a point of playing that way. So we'll literally go over to each other's houses. We'll load up 3 TVs into a car with our consoles, and we drive to each other's houses, and we get extension cords. We do the whole thing, and we'll have TVs beside our TVs, and we'll play. And they're like, "What?" They think I'm crazy.
No, because that's how you get fun out of it. It's your joy.
This is how I play video games. This is my thing. We gotta be in the same room. We gotta be able to talk to each other, punch each other, do the whole thing. That's part of the video game experience to me growing up as a kid. Cool. That's what it's about. It's about being in the same room. Now, there's a flip side to that. And I do have to bring it up just to slightly defend it, because I have been involved with video games where, like Dark Souls, where you're crushing people, and other people online, they'll say, "Hey, you want to come join this? You want to come help me out?" And you'll meet people online, and you'll build these online relationships, online friendships. It's kind of cool, but not your whole life.
But it doesn't replace.
No, and I have a healthy respect for that, and I've met a lot of cool people, and it's been like I could go to England tomorrow and I'd have a place to stay simply because of video games, which is very cool. But that's not what it's all about. And I hate that video games have now like restricted themselves, where you flip over and it says multiplayer options, and it's 1 to 8, but it'll be online, and that means that fuck you. You have to have 8 people who have their own TVs, their own consoles, all playing separately.
Bullshit.
But together.
So your name that you use is New Master 69, right?
Yeah, that's it. The new Master 69.
New
420
Master 69.
Ganja Man. Fuck the police.
Yeah.
That's me. Look me up.
Great. Now you're gonna get killed by every punk on the.
Yeah, that's not my name.
On the thing, but no,
kill that guy if that's that person's name. Yeah, definitely kill that guy.
It does come in waves where you had to play with the single games, and then even in the arcade you had it where there were 2-player games and one player would play, and then the other player.
Yeah,
would but then then the games got to the point where you could play multiple players at the same time. In the early consoles, you had it too. Like with the Atari, you could have like 4 different people on a thing. One of the not on my list, but a good game. It was this thing with castles, and you'd launch these. It was called Warlord or something, where you launch these fireballs and you had to shield and deflect it. And it's one of the few Atari games that you actually had the
paddles, yeah.
Things. There's very few games that work with it, but you could have 4 people playing together with that. And television, you had 2. There was like lots of things, but then it would come, and then games got to the point where it's, and then
I just by yourself. So you guys fell in love with like gaming because and doing it by yourself.
No, but
because
you'd have
that was
people
the
come
way.
over. That's what I'm saying. You'd have 2-player or 4-player
Or like,
games
and they would
where-
gather around the console, like, and then they were like, okay, let's bring this, like, you, instead of everybody standing around the one person playing Dragon Lair, right now you're able to all come to one person's house.
Depending on the game. Some of the games you could. Are we on? Okay, sorry. I was going to say we should record this. So yeah, some of the games you could only play one player, and then someone would watch and you do it. But other games you could be playing at the same time and do it, and it wasn't necessarily chronological that way. That there were
but
earlier
it's
games
bullshit that you don't
do
need, because like split screen should always be an option. Like,
Yeah, they
split
should never
screen-
take that away.
They
once it's a
took it
thing.
away. They did. They literally took split screen away,
Which
and
is
now
bullshit.
you have to own your own fucking thing and
I know.
pay the $500.
Wait
get
till
your
they
own
get. Wait till
TV
they
and do your own
fully
thing.
do the software as a service thing. It's
yeah.
gonna get. It's
It's
gonna get
mental.
worse and worse.
And
You
it
can't even-
divides people. It takes video games and fully throws it into the throes of like, well, video games are bad because my son stays locked in his room and just has his headset on and just talks to himself.
Yeah,
and it's
welcome to the last 40 years.
yeah, that's like, you know,
called
that's
being
not
a-
a healthy habit to have for your entire life. Like, it's a different experience when the people are in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of jump in here, and I'm going to talk about a excuse me, a cool shit moment. So we're talking about locking yourself in, playing video games and stuff like that. So I'm going to tell you a story, and this story comes from basically my work. And I recently was talking to a gentleman who was having a tough time in life. And during that time, he had served a couple tours down in Afghanistan, ex-military, came back, PTSD. And I asked him, I said, hey, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I kind of lock myself in my room and I play a lot of video games. And it's not very social. And so we started talking. And I could see he kind of had this geek thing. And I said, well, what kind of video games do you like playing? And he kind of told me, and I think he mentioned, like it was a kind of like a D&D type of thing.
Probably Dark Souls.
And yeah, it might have been. And so he's talking about it, and it's like that's what he did. So he drank,
Right.
and he played video games,
Yeah.
trying to deal with his PTSD. It's not a very good way to deal with PTSD when you lock yourself in a room and start drinking. However, see where I'm going with this. Then we started talking about kind of Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, and I had mentioned it, and he's like, "Yeah, my brothers play D&D." I said, "They do," and he's like, "Yeah, I do," and I hate to admit it, but they invited me over like 2 months ago, and I started playing. And I
Why
said,
would you hate to admit that?
and because he always thought that D&D role playing, being around a table with people, it was the ultimate geek thing. Like video games are separate from real quote unquote role playing.
Right.
So he was like, I went over there, and he goes, I absolutely loved it, and I play every week, and I always ask my brothers,
That's better therapy.
hey, can I do it? And I said, well, what do you like about it? And he said, well, it's because it's interactive. There's actually people around.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of his brother. He ends up being the dungeon master, and he says, "My brother's so good at it," and fleshes out. I play this half orc named William, and it just all this stuff. And he said it was so much better than for him for therapy than the video games, because he was able to get out of his house. And I thought it was just a remarkable story, just talking about how you can be social, and geeks get a bad rap.
Yeah.
People who play
Yeah.
video games or play role playing or anything like that, and that's why I'm always talking about, you never know who's a geek. There's so many out there. And a lot of martial artists are geek. Some of the most deadly people on the planet who will kill you
Yeah.
have these geek backgrounds that are
for
amazing.
sure.
So I just thought it was kind of a good story.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I'm not trying to discredit the new online aspect, because it is a very cool thing, and I think you can maintain to a certain extent friendships online. But I think that it's frustrating that the option's taken away from you, and I think that as a progressive thing, because like you've said, now it encourages people to stay inside to play every day, because now video games come out with daily things. That's the newest thing
Yeah,
too. I don't know if you
people
guys
gotta
know. It's the same shit that's on your phone app video games, which are all garbage.
Yeah.
It's you can't do this until tomorrow. And then do it tomorrow. And then this comes out, but now there's here tomorrow. So they get you hooked on just
It's
every day
really like a
doing it for an hour. And then it's, what do you do in your spare time? Well, there's all this other bullshit that doesn't progress you in the game, but you can play the game in the interim. And it's these people design these games to get they're like
social
crack
insurance,
to
the
get
same
you
shit
hooked
they
on
use
it.
on Facebook.
Yeah.
stuff,
And then,
right?
you have to wait, 3 days, unless you pay $5, then you can have it now.
Oh,
And
see?
and then they're selling you shit. It's fucking garbage.
Yeah.
So this is where I am terrified for the future of video games with this pay-to-play fucking bullshit. Pay to get a new skin, pay to get a new fucking color, pay to get a new whatever it is. Pay to fucking literally be able to play the game. It's trash unless you're spending that dollar or 25 cents or whatever it is to attempt it.
Yeah, it's
from
the money
start.
generation.
Exactly.
Right? That's what it's come down to.
Yeah.
So, Jason, that's going to lead into your next one. Well, maybe not lead into it, but because he's very passionate. I can see him. He's ready to
fire it up.
I can lead into whatever. I'm gonna. Well, let's see. You're talking about doing group games of people playing together. So one of my favorite games to play still staying in the arcade age before I get to the PC age. One of the favorite ones was Gauntlet and Gauntlet 2.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Also,
yes.
Rampage. So the same sort of thing applies to both these. So the Gauntlet games you could play 4, and the Rampage you could play 3. So there were arcade games that you could play multiple people at the same time and do them. So they did have that kind of social aspect.
I love Gauntlet.
Gauntlet was pretty awesome.
So those are like.
Did you have it for the PC as well?
I've tried the PC, but
the arcade was way better.
It just doesn't replicate the arcade experience. If I ever find places that have that, I will play that every time I see it. Rampage actually used to. I drove to the airport with my brother a few times to play a game because they had one out there.
So did you guys, just to pause, did you guys play Gauntlet Legacy? I don't know if that's Gauntlet 2 or like the second one that came out where like the warrior was the red guy with the axe. And you could customize it and change it. But that's what I knew as the Gauntlet. And then Quasar's right now has the original Gauntlet. And I played it for the first time about 2 months ago with my friends.
How different is it?
Oh, it's way fucking harder.
The early God, it's a super good, super hard game.
Yeah, and
it's a good group game to play with. Play with your buddies.
Yeah.
But it was always funny because when you go to play with your buddies, it's like, oh, dude, I want to be this guy, and no one wanted to be like the wizard, and everyone to be,
But that's what's cool about Gauntlet Legacy.
Yeah.
Allowed you to change. So there was all the different colors, right? So Gauntlet was originally, if you were the blue character, you were the wizard. If you were the yellow character, and like they had a different class for each color.
Velkarod.
Yes.
Elf.
Yeah, and then the archer, warrior, and then the wizard. Yeah. So, but now what Legacy allowed you to do was each color had their own class. So you could be like the blue wizard, the yellow. You could all play as a fucking wizard if you want to play. So, and that's what I grew up on. We used to play it on the ferry all the time. BC Ferries had it. And we'd all, on school trips and stuff, we'd all load in there.
Well, if they still have it, we'll go on a ferry and not go anywhere.
No. Yeah,
Are you guys getting off?
No, it's
Joe walk on, just go back and forth all fucking.
So talking about Gauntlet was actually groundbreaking in many ways. It came out in 1985. It was originally called Dungeons, actually, and was conceived by the Atari game designer Ed Logg, and he claimed that his inspiration came from his son's interest in the paper-based game called Dungeons and Dragons.
Very cool.
Right? And so this kind of formed his interest, and he created this game in 1983 on the Atari 800 home computer system. And the game was developed and it spanned basically from 83 to 85. But because of the legal ramifications of calling it Dungeons, they were not allowed to use it because of TSR. They didn't allow it. So the working title from that became Gauntlet instead of Dungeons. And so in April 1985, Gauntlet came out to the arcade version, and that's what we know today.
So cool. Such a good game.
It was also Atari's first coin-operated game.
Wow.
That featured a voice synthesizer chip inside of it. So it's very cool.
Very cool. So that was going back to your thing about having people playing together.
Yeah.
And that was part of the thing is like instead of going to someone's house, you'd go down to the arcade or wherever the thing happened to be. So it's a different kind of social thing, but similar. Similar, same, but different.
Yeah, good one. Gauntlet's awesome. Again, kind of a Dungeons and Dragons thing. There's always a theme, right?
But Rampage, Godzilla movie just came out. Lizzie was my favorite to play in Rampage.
Yeah, same. Yeah. That's
Awesome.
funny.
Okay, what do you got?
So I'm going to throw a wrench in things and just kind of, I'm sure there'll be a couple spawns off of this conversation, but I'm going to talk about my favorite RTS, which is a real-time strategy game.
Not real-time shooter, real-time strategy.
Real-time strategy, not shooter. I'm not a huge fan of the shooters. There's a couple, but my favorite RTS of all time, and it's not the best one, but it is my favorite, is Age of Mythology. Now, if you listen to the previous podcast, we talked about a little bit Norse mythology, and I grew up on mythology. That was kind of my bedtime stories. And Age of Mythology was fantastic. It really bridged the gap between these myths and video games for me. And I mean, to this day, it's probably one of the games I've spent the most time playing. It has a very interesting, crazy story where they bridge the Greek, Egyptian, and Norse.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I've played
together.
The board game where you have the choice of the.
And then they came out with the
different cool
expansions,
monsters
which was the Titans, which were the Greeks' like parentage. It was such a good expansion. It was phenomenal. So it's basically, if you've played Civilizations, which I'm sure we're going to talk about at some point here. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But it's the sort of mythology skin, if you could say, to the Civilization games, where your goal is basically to amass resources that allow you to create an army, that allow you to conquer an opponent, whether that be through economic or.
So was it similar to Age of Empires?
Very similar, yeah. So
Okay.
Civilization would be the...
Yeah,
I think it was made by the same people who made Civilization,
Okay.
and then Age of Empires was like that other branch. Like,
Pros.
yeah, exactly. So, but basically, like it's top down, real time strategies, similar to StarCraft. StarCraft, I got to do a shout out to that too. But I think Age of Mythology takes the cake for me simply because the theme and how deep they dove into that, and the ability they had one hero who spanned all of the mythologies. So you go through, you start off as a Greek guy, and he's doing the Greek mythology. He's just this guy. He's just this villager. He's got his family, and then he starts to kind of become more of a warrior, and he starts to interact more with the gods. Then he leaves Greece and goes to Egypt. He deals with the Egyptians. Then he leaves the Egyptians. Then he goes to the Norse. It just gets crazier and crazier. And then he goes and it's the Titans, and it builds and it builds, and it dragged the mythology
nice.
into it, as well as doing that real-time strategy as it got more and more complicated, and you'd have to build in different ways. And one of my favorite things was, in a lot of different real-time strategies, you have to gather resources. In Age of Mythology, one of the unique resources was favor. So this is the resource that you gather by worshiping the gods. Now, as the Greeks, you gathered favor by praying to the temple, as you would, like, typically people would say, okay, if you pray to gods, they would give you their favor. The Egyptians, you would have to gather your favor by an alternate means. And by the Norse, you'd have to physically combat. You'd have to literally go on raiding parties and just fight. Whenever you fought, that's how you gathered favor. So the Egyptians was like you would build monuments to them.
To the gods, yeah.
And that was their thing, like pyramids, sphinxes, those things. And then you would just, over time, based off of how many monuments you had, gather that. The Greeks was like manpower. You had to just throw guys. They would go worship at the temples. The Egyptians, you had to build the monuments and then protect your monuments. And the Norse was literally you have to throw dudes to the grinder to
like
build
different play strategies.
And they had different rewards. So the Greeks, their mythological creatures weren't necessarily the most powerful, but you could get more of them because you could just throw guys and they would just worship him, and that was an early thing to be able to do. The Egyptians, it was a slower build because you had to build the monuments, and like by the time you got to the top tier monuments, you were way farther along, and you'd be kind of behind the other guys. The really crazy thing was the Norse, where you had to just go and do the raiding parties and literally throw your resources. You build an army, and you'd have to like send it in as fodder to literally die to be able to get the mythological.
Yeah, see, that's why it sounds familiar, Alex, because it's a spin-off of the Age of Empires series.
Yes.
It was actually part of the whole series.
Yeah.
So I never played that. I played Age of Empires, which is exactly the same, but it's just the concept's a little bit different. Yeah, fantastic. I love that game. So I would love that game too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was so good. And it's old
And
at
what
this
was
point.
it for? Was it PC or
it was
some
PC,
console?
PC. I played it for PC. Definitely not
And
console. Yeah, PC game.
One of the big advantages of playing PC games is you'll still be able to play them.
Yeah, you could fire that up right now. It's phenomenal.
You'll be able to. The thing about PC games is you'll be able to fire them up in 20 years from now.
Yeah.
Whereas some of these console games with these online ones where you have to, like you were saying,
You get patches and stuff, and you can't do
the
it.
problem is now. So
that
like,
once their servers go offline,
Yeah,
you will
I'm
not
playing-
be able to play that game. If it's your favorite game now, 20 years from now, you will not be able to play that
the
game.
PlayStation games that I played, the online factor is they're gone.
They're
It's
gone.
done.
Once
right?
the servers are gone, you're gone.
Yeah.
So sometimes the older games have replay. What makes a good game? Replay value is part of it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's totally true. And one of the games that I was thinking about the Age of Empires and Age of Mythology, there was a game that I played, and I can't even find it online. This is how obscure it is. And hopefully someone who's listening to this will remember this game. And I've actually mentioned it to Jason, and Jason doesn't remember it either.
Try me now. Sometimes my
Okay, so this game,
It's later in the day.
the game was called Breach.
No.
And Breach was a PC game. And essentially it was you'd build up kind of soldiers, and it was like a top-down thing, and you were able to, it was called Breach because you were soldiers and you would breach into buildings and, you know, go do your special tactics or whatever you're going to do.
Okay.
And I actually don't even remember a lot about it.
Did you build the fortifications also?
I think you might have,
one
yes.
called Castle that sounds similar.
Yeah, so this one was called Breach, and I've been trying to find kind of more to kind of trigger my memory, but I have this memory of it that was awesome. But I think it was so obscure that it was kind of like, it was a one-off.
Right.
And, you know, so that was...
If it was a PC game, try like something like Abandonia or something and see. You can get
Yeah, I'm going to do some...
Abandonware is what they call software that's not published anymore, that companies don't care about, and you can still get it.
Yeah, so that's going to be in my kind of top 10 because I do have some fond memories playing the game, although I don't remember a lot about it, which is kind of weird. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to round out my arcade thing before I move. I'm going to round out my arcade stuff here with, there's a lot of different fighting games. I know that's a kind of genre that people do, and I'm sure you guys will have different versions of what you would do as a genre fighting games. But my favorites were tag team wrestling and Renegade or Renegades. So this is like pre-Street Fighter
Okay.
stuff, and I know there was I don't know. These ones were later ones, so those were the games that I really liked out of the arcade fighting games. So, tag team wrestling, exactly what it sounds like. You got two guys in a ring against two other guys, and you could play against the computer, or you could play against someone else. And so you could sort of have four people playing, because you could have, you know, you and your buddy as one tag team, and the other guys and the buddy as a tag team, and you get two guys fighting each other. But then you tag in and tag out, so you wouldn't always be playing the same guys.
So it's kind of like the WWF like style of game,
yeah,
like
before
that
WWF,
right?
yeah,
Or WWE, or whatever it used to be. Yeah.
So Renegade, does that look familiar?
Yeah. Renegade.
Oh my
Okay,
goodness.
so I'm showing a
Wow.
Yeah, Renegades.
so they look like gang members.
There's
or
gang members. It's like the street fighting game. It's like super cheesy, but
my
as like a
goodness.
fighter. So it was like it's better than Kung Fu Master, which just had the scrolling one way thing. So you got like the things where you'd have like chains and pipes and stuff like that you fight. It's like super cheesy, but it's like a good good fighter game.
Well, apparently
it was not too complicated. Like it was
PlayStation has it.
It was more complicated than the single scrollers where you could only like move it in a line, like say Kung Fu Master, I think was the one like that. It took that up a notch, but it was before the. Is it called Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat?
Yeah, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat.
You can talk about those ones with yours, because those are a little bit after me. So, but this was the one that I did play a little bit of those. The one that had the Indian guy with the long arms and stuff. That was kind of cool. But that was on the edge of my. Those are later games for me. But this was the ones that I played for the fighter games in the arcade. Just to give you a little different thing. And just one last thing to round up my arcade thing, and then I'll let you go on. You were mentioning about the helicopter game that you played on the PC.
Yeah.
In the arcade. I started the show off by talking about games that were a quarter. Well, there was an era where there were some games that were so powerful and so good and so new that you had to pay 2 quarters.
Oh, yes.
When
the laser disc games came out. Now, this was before CDs, before compact discs existed.
He's going to mention it.
It's not the one you think I'm going to mention.
Oh, I'm thinking Dragon's
You're thinking Dragon's Lair, but I'm talking about Mach 3. Dragon's Lair was a great.
Oh my God!
Dragon's Lair was a great game, but it was one of the ones that you had to memorize.
Having Apache.
Or do you want to talk about Dragon's Lair?
No, I don't. But I just when you mentioned Mach 3, I was like,
So Mach 3 is my choice for the last one of my arcade games. Wow. So it was a 2-quarter laser disc game. Remember, no CDs back then. The CDs they weren't even a thing, and there wasn't even laser discs for videos then. It was like a game that had super realistic graphics. It was like flying super realistic. It was like flying, at the time. No, seriously, at the time, people that weren't playing would just go around and stand there. It's like, whoa, look at that. It's like watching.
Didn't you sit in it? Wasn't it like a?
There was different versions. You could have like the sit-in one or the stand-up one. Like arcade games had different formats that they used, but it was like flying through real canyons,
and it had that joystick,
and you had the joystick with the thruster stick, and so it was like now it might not seem so impressive. I'm sure there's been much better versions since then, but it was a revolutionary game at the time.
Cool, yeah.
That just was blown away. I played so much of that, and people would stand around and just watch. Now, Dragon's Lair, which what you thought I was going to say, was probably the most famous of the Laserdisc games. Now, personally, I found it to be way too hard of a game, that it was one of those ones you had to memorize, okay, after 0.3 seconds left, move your joystick left, and after 0.35 seconds, move it here.
It was very limited.
It was very limited.
Yeah,
you had to memorize the patterns and stuff, and people would be like, I remember people like throwing
Feed the
$20
machine.
at quarters, and this is like in what year was it? I don't know, mid 80s kind of thing. Quarters in there, mid to late 80s, and people are throwing $20 a quarters in there. So that's like $40, $50 now.
Yeah,
they have it in Quasars. I played about 30, not even 30 seconds. I played like 10 seconds.
It's not very fun.
I got past the first one, and I was like, I'm literally gonna go up to the guy and be like, "What the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, am I just supposed to randomly guess the combination of button and direction that happens at this time?
It's
like,
a choose your own adventure.
You're supposed to put in enough quarters and make enough mistakes until you figure it out. So this is where I'm going to do a little dungeon on this.
Okay.
It's like cool shit, bullshit. So this was my idea with this one, is that Mach 3 is a cool shit laser thing.
Yeah.
Dragon's Lair is bullshit. Bullshit in the playability, although I really loved standing around watching the people that wanted to put $20 fucking quarters in there. I didn't have that kind of money. It's like, dude, you do that. I'm going to sit here drinking my cherry Coke.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in. Hold that thought, but Jason makes a really good point. There were some games that were spectator games, and Dragon's Lair was one of them.
Right.
I would do the same. I would watch people waste their money to play the game so I could see what was going on because I didn't want to spend it.
Yeah.
That's so true.
And in fact, there's Dragon's Lair and Dragon's Lair 2, and there was a space version. I actually have DVDs at home that'll show you the gameplay.
Right.
And you can go through it without playing the course, but you can see what would have happened without and all the choices and all the decision trees. It's like a choose your own adventure thing, but as a video game. But it was one of those early the cash grab aspect of it.
Right.
It was like a super cool game and stuff. But
they also were taking like a shitload of your money while they're doing it. It's like one of those things like, oh, it's art, but I also am spending a shitload.
Whereas I could fly my fighter jet around for a long time, and it was like Mach 3 was like a super Zaxxon.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to segue because you're talking about the fighter games. So I'm going to mention my favorite fighter game, which is going to be the Soul Calibur series. So for me, it was Soul Calibur 2. Now, Soul Calibur was one of these series that was invented by the Namco, again, which I already had mentioned before. And there were like several main installments and series that spun off of that. But originally released as an arcade game, Soul Edge, in 1995, and later ported to video game consoles. For me, it was the later version, which was Soul Calibur 2. So the first one was just the video game console, and people literally would buy just that arcade console version simply to play this game.
Okay.
So there were other games on the console, but they would buy the console just to play that particular game?
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then the Soul Calibur 2, which is when I first experienced it, came out. Now this is I grew up. This is when I was 7 or 8. So this was a little bit into my video game experience. It wasn't quite the handheld device. It was my first consoles. I got a PlayStation first, and then I got a GameCube from Nintendo. And the Soul Calibur for both of those versions was Soul Calibur 2, and it allowed you the unique thing about Soul Calibur 2. This is when they started having the bidding wars over a game.
Which console would get it?
Which console would get it? But this is fantastic because they all got it, but each console got a different character as a bonus character. Oh. So this is very cool. So for me, I had the PlayStation, which you got Street Fighters. I can't remember his name, and people in the comics can go nuts over this. It was the old guy with the spiky hair and the bald patch in the middle of his head. I cannot remember his name. I had never played Street Fighter, but I remember that character, and he was the guy you got. Then for the GameCube, you got Link from Zelda. Classic, Nintendo character. And then the Xbox, which was the envy. Like, I literally have never owned an Xbox product, but it was the envy of my life, was you got to play as Spawn. And that was so cool to me. The Xbox had
So you'd have
Spawn.
different friends would have different consoles, and you
could go over to my buddy who had the Xbox, and we'd play Soul Calibur 2, and I'd be like Spawn every time, and then I'd go to my house and be like shit, I don't know any of Spawn's moves. Like, fuck, this is a complete waste of my. But I was, but I played as Link. But anyway, but you know what I mean. Like, it was cool that they had exclusive content.
Zelda Link?
Yeah, Zelda from or Link from the Zelda series. But they had like exclusive content for each console, which they still do to a certain extent. Right. But it's more, it's even greedier now. Where like, so for example, like certain games will release content, but only the PlayStation will have it.
Yeah.
This game, what I loved was that you had a different thing for the Xbox, you had a different thing for the PlayStation, you had a different thing for the Nintendo. So they all got something, and you can, debate your own favorite thing. But like, what was really cool was that they're all different, and they continue to do this. So, for example, they released the next Soul Calibur, and you could play as Darth Vader for the PlayStation or Yoda for the Xbox. Very cool. Like, you know what I mean? So that's why I love the Soul Calibur series, because they kind of did that, like, we're not going to, like, fully sell out.
Yeah,
we're
so it's
gonna
not,
offer,
it's not totally exclusive. It's
we're going to offer
everybody can do it, but
different
you do
content
have
for
something
different
for each
consoles,
one.
right?
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and anyway, just as it's Mortal Kombat, like same kind of like Street Fighter style game, but they really throw an in-deep story at you, and you basically get to play as all the characters in the game. They have their own unique story. It's basically like, you fight 10 guys, and your 5th guy is a unique character, and your 10th guy is, and it's like there's a story in there. Right. They're all kind of the same, but they're kind of bullshit, but still very cool. It ranks amongst the top fighting games for me, for sure.
Interesting.
What about you for fighting games?
Well, I didn't really get into a lot of the fighting games. I did like kind of the first-person games like that came out in the Xbox and things like that, and I'd played like Ghost Recon and things. But one game that I played this with my wife, believe it or not, and it was about 2001, 2000, around that time, and it was Hitman. And
it's been a strong marriage, apparently.
It is. And so, and she's not really into video games, but I remember picking it up, and it was
Stone Cold Assassin.
Jesper Kidd, who does the soundtrack for it, is amazing. And I'm totally into soundtracks, but Hitman was so good because it was super creepy, and the music and everything about it. Loved it, still love it. And I remember picking up the game again years later, and I was like, I'm going to play it again. And I did, and it was still brought back kind of that memory of like, man, this was fun. So
you should play it with her once a year.
Yes, keep the marriage strong.
It's like marriage therapy. Yeah. It's like couples therapy. And it's like, how much do people pay for like one session? It's like, no, just get the thing. It's, hey, baby, love you.
Yeah, just play Hitman. Yeah. Kill people. Like, totally cool.
Problem solved.
Yeah, so Hitman definitely in there, if one of my top 10 games, just because of the ambiance and the feeling it had. Yeah. That's what I really liked about it. Yeah. So we're going to do one more round. We're going to
be more than a couple rounds.
No, we're wrapping it up, I think.
Okay, super quick. I just want to pause before we do the one more round. This is the bonus round.
Okay, bonus round.
The in-between round. I'm going to shout out to Borderlands just because I've been playing it recently. It's a phenomenal game. It's the only shooter game. I haven't talked about shooter games. I kind of diss shooter games. It's a loot and shoot, so you just kill shit and get guns that let you kill more shit. And it's fantastic. Great story. Yep. Fantastic. Check out Borderlands. Just a quick throw in there.
No, that's okay. Because I'm not going to use this as one of my things, but just in response to Alex's thing here is the best first-person shooter is one of the first ones, Wolfenstein.
Oh, Castle Wolfenstein.
So I remember I started playing Wolfenstein. There was the original Wolfenstein, then there was Wolfenstein 2. These were on the Atari clone that we had with the Amber monitor.
Yes.
And then there was on the PC later was Wolfenstein 3D. I know they came out with other ones later, but I never got into those. But for me, Wolfenstein 3D, and there's actually was a really good version I still have on my original iPad. I don't know if they still have it for iPad, but when the iPad 1 came out, got Wolfenstein 3D. Like, talk about the first person shooter. You get in there, you shoot, you kill fucking Nazis, right? And you take
amazing.
You take something. You start with a knife, kill fucking Nazis. Get their guns, take some ammo, go in through things, go and kill Hitler. Like, I mean,
but Jason,
who doesn't like that?
Doom came out before that, right?
No, Doom
was a response to
sequel to Wolfenstein.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Doom takes Wolfenstein and then they go into Quake, and I lost track. I played a little bit of Doom and stuff like that, but to me, Wolfenstein is like the purest form of first-person shooter. It's like there's a bunch of cool other fancy things that you can do later, and I dabbled a little bit, but Wolfenstein is the if I had to choose one first, this is what I'm saying. Is
Yes.
We've got to cover one from a category. So if I had to choose one first-person shooter, I would choose Wolfenstein 3D.
One of the interesting things about when they came out with Quake, because they had Doom and then Quake came out, and Quake was huge.
Yeah.
You remember?
I know. I never played
Again,
it, but
so
I know of
Wolfenstein,
it.
Doom, then Quake.
Now Quake, and I remember they actually had something called the Quake engine.
Yeah. You showed me that. You did show me that. You showed me the footage of that.
And so in the Quake engine, basically they specifically made basically a processor that could handle this whole thing. It was revolutionary at the time. Yeah.
Okay, so this is our final round. We're gonna start it off now. Final round, everybody. Okay, Jason, kick it off.
I've got.
He's going to do some honorable mentions.
I can do. I can,
That's how we expand
I can
this.
do one more thing about shooters, and then I'll do my final round. Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, it's a big topic,
Go ahead.
man.
I know it is.
Okay, so there's first-person shooters, which is, like I said, Wolfenstein did that. Wolfenstein did that whole thing. But another great innovation in shooters was a game called XCOM. Now there's some new versions of it out. There was XCOM, Alien. It was U.S. UFO defense. It depends, I guess, whether you're in UK or the U.S. Anyway, Canada, we kind of get a bit of both. So XCOM, it wasn't a first-person shooter. It was a top-down. So again, like Gauntlet, but it was instead of being a real-time shooter game, it was a turn-based thing, which I'll get in my real best choice, which I'm saving for last.
Okay.
I'll get to, but a turn-based, top-down shooter game, and you had a squad of guys. Aliens were invading the XCOM. Yeah, that's one of the newer versions.
Okay.
There was XCOM 1. These are PC games in the 90s. And so there's XCOM 1, and then the sequel to it, XCOM 2, Terror from the Deeps. Way fucking harder game. Challenge you to still beat that thing today. That is super hard.
You're talking like Final Fantasy, like, I don't know if you know that, but like where you have a group and then you move them around.
And you take turns moving your guys into positions, and then you can fire at things.
Oh, okay.
And you get different equipment.
It's more like Risk video game style, like where once you engage, it's still a turn-based engagement. It's not like once you engage, it then develops into its own unique.
Well, I think the new versions do. Like the new XCOM ones go into real first-person, real-time shooters. Like you go, but the old one was just you do turn-based things, but you also had to research things. So it was like the other games I'm going to mention when I get my final turn.
Okay.
Is you had to research things. So you'd shoot down these alien ships. That's how you'd trace down these alien ships. You'd shoot them down. You'd fight the aliens on the ground at the crash site. And then you'd take some of their technology, you'd recover it, take it back to your science guys, your lab guys would research the technology, and then you'd develop your stuff based on alien technology, and then you'd upgrade your stuff, and you could take different tracks of technology, and then you upgrade your guys, and you go fight more aliens, and then there were sequels. And so the first one was the basic one, the next one, aliens crash in the oceans instead of on the land, and they had other ones. There was a big series of it, and there's, if you don't want to do those ones, then the new ones would totally appeal to new gamers,
cool.
and they still take the same concept, but get it going with first player real time instead of the turn.
Yeah.
I think they do turn based, then they cut into real time.
Okay,
I
so
just dabbled in that. You need. Well, when I say new, I probably mean like 2012 or something. But that's really new for me, right? Versus 1993 or something. I'd have to look it up. It was sometime around then.
the year I was born.
When I was doing this is like 386, 486.
26 years ago. Oh, yeah, it's new.
So.
Okay, all right. Well, you're gonna kick off the final round. Let's get it going here. Final round. What's your final round mention here?
Okay, so my final round for my favorite video game of all time. So yes, there's honorable mentions that we can throw in there. We didn't talk about Myst. We didn't talk about tons of stuff, right?
We'll talk about
Alex,
My brain is melting when you said Myst.
So because there's so many games out
Check
there.
Myst out.
And people are thinking, it's like, why didn't they mention this? Why didn't they mention this? Because there are so many. So we're just covering things. I'm sure when the mics go off, we'll be like, oh, we're a bunch of dummies. We didn't mention so-and-so.
We got some good shit though.
We can do some other episode later.
Yeah, and we had some obscure stuff. So what I'm going to tackle for my last round, beer opens.
Oh,
This is what we're going to tackle.
he's gonna have another round.
I'm going to tackle handheld video game stuff. Okay? And the reason I'm doing that is because I played a lot of these when I was a kid, and Nintendo had these little handheld games, Donkey Kong, a whole bunch of things. Jason, do you remember these?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm showing a picture of them.
I remember seeing them.
That
That wasn't my thing, but I remember seeing people playing them a lot.
Yeah, so they had a ton of them. there's so many of the people at school. I think I had maybe one, and some of them were double where they'd flip open. You'd have 2 screens, and you could only have limited.
Some of them were like monocolored, and later they got color and stuff.
And you could only move. You could only move like left and right or up and down, and try to go through the screens and stuff like that. And that's where the Game Boy comes up with that controller. It all comes from that,
with
right?
PC games to do those.
And really loved them. I think that they need, like, I'm just looking at them now, and there's so many kind of different options. Really fun. And then there was another game that I never had, and actually I should mention, I never actually owned a console when I was a kid. I never had Atari. I never had Intellivision or ColecoVision.
Oh, we had Intellivision.
No, it's funny. I never did. I had a computer, but I never had these. I had to go to my friends' houses to play this, where like Tank or whatever on the Atari.
So you were deprived as a child.
I was so deprived, right? But there was a game that one of my buddies, Rob Riley, he had. I don't even know if he remembers this, but I'm going to show you a picture
if
of it.
you're listening.
Yeah, I'm going to tag him actually, so he knows. But he had this game. It looked like a mini arcade game.
Whoa,
Cool.
And so
that's handheld.
It's not handheld.
Yeah,
it's probably the size.
That's like first
Remember
cell
the first
phone
laptops
edition.
were like briefcases. Right?
That's massive. You got to post a picture. Yeah, that's insane.
So essentially, it's about half the size of like a laptop, and it had this little joystick and a button, and you'd turn it on, you'd put your batteries in, and it was like this little screen, which is like maybe like 2 inches by 2 inches, and it looked like a little arcade game, but it was like it was amazing. And
it was portable.
Yeah, portable.
So how big was it compared to? Remember they had like those little mini Pac-Man ones and stuff.
Same size.
The same as one of those.
Exactly the same size, and I got to hit Rob up because I got to ask him. I can't even remember what the game was, but I remember he had it. And I was like, "That's so cool!" And the funny thing about these handheld games, especially that one, you'd play it and be awesome, but the things would run through batteries like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, they were like
double
A's or D's or C's.
Yeah, but it was like 8 of them.
Like
Yeah, you just like boom, boom, you just like.
And this was before rechargeable batteries.
And no, rechargeable batteries
they were
out.
out?
Yeah, because I remember, and again, I'm going to give a shout out to Rob Riley because he had rechargeable batteries. I've never seen these things before, and they sucked ass because you plug them in, you throw them in, and they do because
This was Mark One
lithium
rechargeable
didn't
battery.
exist
Yeah.
like how long would it last? It's like it lasts like 25 minutes, and you throw it in.
But
And-
you can recharge it.
Wait, but how was the save on this game? Like when your battery died, were you just like fucked until the last time
Save?
you saved?
There's no saving.
Save.
What do you mean? Like, so how do you just play the
You
game?
play until you win or
So you
lose,
just like
or you die,
So
or
you
the batteries
have to
die.
beat it in 25 minutes, or you're fucked. Or
No, there's no.
Save.
Yeah, it's just.
you guys are just save. Save is like a. Oh my god.
Yes, it would save your score and something like that, but it wasn't a very sophisticated game, Alex.
Okay. So you had 25 minutes to play, and then you're fucked.
Yeah, well, only if you had the rechargeable batteries that Rob had.
Was it one of the ones that, some of them had like the little AC things that you could.
Some of them, but
you
this
could
one,
plug in, so
yes,
you
but
could have them either on batteries or.
yeah, but this one did, and this is back in the '80s when batteries really sucked, and batteries were also super expensive. I don't know if you know this, but battery prices have gone down.
Oh, way down.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I'm
Like,
an electrician. I'm aware.
okay, I'm just making sure. But so one of the things about batteries, when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, you'd buy whatever electronics, and then it was like batteries not included, and then you'd have to spend double the amount on the batteries to charge whatever device you got.
That's why batteries were included because it sounded.
And then
too
they would be like,
expensive
"Oh,
if
they're
you
dead. Oh, they're dead." But now batteries last way longer, and they're so
Here's
much
a
cheaper.
spoiler. Now they're doing that with fucking cars. If you're looking at electric cars, that's the scam. Is the batteries.
Okay.
Just throwing that out there.
What do you mean?
We'll do another episode.
Okay,
on
well,
that.
I won't buy
I'm
an
curious.
electric car.
Okay.
Tune in for the future electric.
future electric car
Hold off
episode.
for the rest of the year on
So there's my shout outs to handheld games.
Wow.
And so, Jason, last round, what do you got?
All right. Well, I don't have any handheld games. My last round is going to be the best games ever fucking made. It's a category called 4X. Strategy games, turn-based strategy games. Now, the granddaddy of them all.
Yep.
The game that changed my life in so many ways. Civilization.
Ooh, I knew this was
Civ.
going to come. I knew, yeah.
Civ, original Civ.
Okay.
I remember getting original Civ.
You spent some hours playing that game?
I spent so many hours. There's I don't know how much time we got left in the store, but we're going to go as long as it's going to take. So that's how you do civilization.
This is happening.
Because you know why we're going to do this? Because there's always time for just one more turn.
Oh, yeah.
So civilization. Got that game. When did it come out? 90, 91?
Okay.
Must have been one of those years there. And I got that game, and it's great. You've got like the Egyptian lying underneath the streets of the modern thing on it. Original Civ.
So good.
I was already into D&D and stuff. And
So sorry, just as a sidebar, like there's a big age gap here, and I have played the original Civ. Like
Yeah.
we used to.
It's
like,
probably one of the greatest most games of all
we used
time.
to do like LAN parties and like play Civ with like 8 of us and just do like an entire night of just like drinking and fucking each other up.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you died, you like go stand next to your buddy and be like, fuck this guy because he just killed me.
Yeah,
like
fuck, man.
you
Yeah.
go, you walk around, you do the tour.
Yeah.
You walk by and you see who's got the best shot at fucking up the guy who just fucked you
you
up.
up, yeah.
And then you'd go fuck that guy. And what I loved was always like, as people were walking by, I'd be like, nah, man, like I don't have anything, like I'm fucked, man. Like I'm really struggling. Like, oh, man, I wish you did this or that. And then I'd fucking win it. And like my whole thing was like, if nobody stopped and watched me, then I did a good night. If I could get everybody to pass me by as I fucked everybody up, then we were good.
So we have to give a shout out because he's mentioning Civilization. We have to give a shout out to the man who developed it, Sid
Meier. And we
Yes.
talked about microprose
We
before.
didn't even talk about pirates.
We can do. There's time for honorable
You have
mentions
one-
and
you have one last
runners up.
round, so
there's a lot to say about the Civ thing. So
Sid Meier.
Civ, and when I was playing Civ, I switched my majors and university because of Civ. It was one of the underlying reasons of switching the things. And not only did I switch it, but then I ended up playing so much Civilization. I was addicted to it. That's the only video game that I've been ever like a change your life addicted to.
Yeah.
And so I had to get from my 386 that I played Civilization on, I upgraded to a laptop. My very first laptop was a 46 SLC, and it had a gray screen monitor.
Interesting.
One of the best. So this was at the last of the gray screens, right before, right as color laptops were coming out. Now the reason I got a gray screen monitor, beautiful gray screen, great for doing word processing, doing your papers and stuff. 256 shades of gray, awesome.
256 shades of gray.
Awesome. But you know what you couldn't do? You couldn't play Civilization because you couldn't tell the colors of one fucking nation from the other. So I saved my academic career by getting this laptop. That's how good Civilization was. But it wasn't just Civilization that I was playing. Because not only did Microprose and Sid Meier have that, they had a game called Master of Orion, which was a space civilization game. I mean, I could talk just about Civilization. I could do a whole episode just on 4X games. There was Master of Orion, and then they came out later with a game called Alpha Centauri, and they had an expansion called Alien Crossfire.
See, you're totally cheating now because you've now mentioned 4 games.
These are Civilization. I'm mentioning. So this is Civilization. This is the best game ever. And so that's where they went. Now, I can talk a lot about those, but I'm not going to because you're trying to rush me along here. But then the culmination of all of these 4X games is a game called Dominion, which most of you listening here, even if you're really hardcore gamers, haven't heard of, but you're missing the best video game ever made by mankind. Do you want me to stop or do you want me to say something about it?
Go ahead.
Okay. It's called Dominions, and there's Dominions 2, Dominions 3, Dominions 4. You can get it on Good Old Games. They now have it on Steam. Good Old Games is much better, at least when I got it, because you don't have to put that online crap. And it's a game that's made later, but it's made like an old game. So it takes the best of Civilization, the best of Master of Magic. Oh, sorry, Master of Orion. They also had a fantasy one called Master of Magic, which was also like Civilization meets Magic the Gathering.
Interesting.
Right, with the different colors of Magic and the different things like that.
What is this Magic the Gathering you talking about?
Magic the Gathering is a card game, which I'm sure we'll do an episode on.
Another podcast
on sometime.
Tune in next
you want me to do
several weeks.
Yeah, we'll do something on that. But it took those. Now this Dominions game came out later. I can't remember when it came out, but it was done by just a couple guys in Sweden or Denmark or Norway or some Scandinavian thing. Just like a couple buddies made this game. Super amounts of replay, super customization. So you're basically trying to be a god. It's called, you're a pretender god. The main god died, and then you're trying to become the new god.
You
that
get
inherits
pets and
it.
shit. You can get like a pet cow and a pet tiger, and like
No, it's better. It's cooler than that. You get to design your god.
Yeah.
And there's a point building system for building your gods, and you can get more points by doing things. So anyway, you can build gods different things. There's tons of different races each, and then you design the way that your country is, the way your race is. You got, instead of a tech tree, you've got a magic development tree.
So how long did you play this game for?
There's thousands of hours, hundreds of hours, whatever, lots of time put into it. And I do play every now and then, but I try to restrict myself these past years.
Wow, it's like crack, huh?
It's like crack. So these are the kind of games that if I could only play one game, if I was restricted to like a solitary cell with one game that I could only play,
yes,
it would be Dominions Dominions 4. But because it has the best of all of the 4X games all put into one. And I'm mentioning it because people probably haven't heard of it, and it's got the characteristics of Civ. CivNet is the best version of Civ ever put out.
And one of the things about Civilization, Jason, that everyone has this story, but I was going to university at the time, and when I was going to university, I was in one of my classes, and I remember looking over, and one of my friends who was going to university at the time, Jeff Stott, he wasn't in class, and the professor's like, does anyone know where Jeff is? And I'm like, I don't know. So we go to the dorm room. I see the door open and down the hall, and Jeff is sitting there playing Civilization. And it was commonplace that people they wouldn't go to classes. They'd just sit and play Civ.
I would sit for 12 hours straight, and I wouldn't eat, wouldn't go to the bathroom, and then suddenly something would happen, and then you'd get up or the phone would ring, and like, oh, I haven't eaten, I haven't gone to the bathroom.
Such a
it's
typical
like, oh
thing.
my God, and it's dark outside, and so they go, just one more turn.
Yeah.
Okay,
Anyway,
Alex.
I'm gonna put all you motherfuckers to shame.
Okay.
You can't top that.
Oh my goodness, yes I can. This is a video game that people have literally died while playing and partaking in.
What?
Yeah, this is I'm gonna take you way back to the year 1996.
Okay.
Whoa, okay, I remember.
Yeah,
that year.
this is the first video game that I ever played, and it's a game. So if you're listening, I want you to try and key in the comments before I reveal it. This is a game. It was developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. There's the big spoiler. You got to figure it out by then.
Okay.
Pokemon.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is the game that I grew up on the Game Boy. Yeah, the Game Boy I grew up playing. Mm-hmm. It was Pokemon Blue that I had purchased.
Okay.
There's different colors.
Oh my God, there's so many colors. Anyway, it's not the best video game out there, but neither is Galaga. It's the same thing. It's got basic commands, basic consoles, basic turn-based gameplay.
What was the appeal?
The appeal was the RPG aspect. So people can say whatever they want to say about Pokemon, but it is an RPG game. So you go around and your goal, you don't level up your character specifically, but you catch creatures and then you level those creatures up. And then you use those levels to get more levels and to play more, to fight higher level creatures, and then to eventually your goal is to rise to the champion, to the Pokemon League, and to beat the Pokemon League, and complete the game by catching all of the Pokemon. So for me, Pokemon was my intro to video games, my intro to just that electronic aspect. That I remember literally.
That was your gateway drug?
I remember the Christmas. I can't. It must have been 1996. I was 3 or 4 years old. I opened up my fucking present.
And you remember?
I remember. I specifically remember this. I remember opening
Defining
my present
moment.
in my apartment building. I remember opening this present that my stepdad and my mother got for me.
Okay.
And my aunt. It was a big deal. I know it was a big deal. Everybody pulled in on this.
Clan put in the money for this one.
And it was a Game Boy Color, and I had this purple transparent, so it was like semi-see-through fucking purple Game Boy Color, which is like the newer version of the Game Boy because it had color
Must
to
have
it.
been at the same time as those Macs came out with different colors. They were imitating that.
And I got Pokemon Blue, which had my, I gotta say, I dressed up as him as a fucking kid. I was Blastoise for Halloween. Squirtle, War Turtle, Blastoise, shout out. You guys, my fucking
This
main
is
man.
amazing. Okay, yeah.
The Pokemon, it changed my life. It was the intro to video games for me, I think, for my generation. And, I think that for a game that literally has you wandering around in the grass.
Oh, that was the one that people were wandering the streets.
Yes,
and
literally
looking for
dying,
things.
walking off the
that's what
fucking
people-
cliffs.
That's Pokemon Go.
Yes.
Yeah.
But still, Pokemon, the same franchise, the same thing, People literally die for this shit. That's what I gotta say.
So
Like,
Civilization, you die of starvation sitting in your
Yeah.
basement at your monitor.
I mean, how many cases of that were there? But still,
And Pokemon, you walk onto traffic.
you walk out into traffic and get
Video
hit
games can be dangerous,
trying to catch
kids.
a fucking Caterpie, the lamest shit ever. But still, all I gotta say, I had to do a mention to it, and it's not the greatest game. It doesn't have the most in-depth story, but it does have a very developed story for what it is, and it does really allow. I think it allows that, like, I was 3 or 4 years old. I wasn't able to read. It literally encouraged me to read. It encouraged me to get into the video game lifestyle. And I think it did it in a healthy way where, you know, the progression, the way, like, for me, I think that Pokemon, I had my own personal handheld Game Boy, and then there was the trade link. So you could get a plug and you could plug it in, you could trade, you could deal with other kids. That was the whole thing. Like, instead of trading cards, we traded a Pokemon on our game. Like, my gaming console became a way to interact with other people and became a social thing for me at an early
like you were saying
stage.
about the LAN party.
Yes,
it was your earliest.
It was a handheld LAN. Yeah, and
Okay.
so it was fantastic. We used to do the Pokemon
This is the first
cards.
thing I've ever heard about Pokemon that
Yeah.
is like, okay, now I see why someone could be appealed to this.
Fuck you guys, 1993. Since
Best year
Infinity,
ever.
best year ever. But yeah, so 1996 when it came out, I think it's a fantastic game, a fantastic franchise. Obviously, they do the same shit, different story, and they're trying to sell the same thing to younger generations, and that's what's a little frustrating. Is I think Pokemon Go it definitely jumped the shark. It came out.
Pokemon gone.
Oh, it's so, like, Pokemon Go still exists, and it's not a fantastic game. I'm not trying to say that they broke the mold or
The
anything.
CIA will get a better version out when
The original
virtual reality
Pokemon,
stuff.
I have to mention it here because it really shaped a generation, and it really, it progressed video games, and that's a fact. Like, there's billions of people who play it. Nintendo stock when they came out with Pokemon Go, it was like poof, immediately skyrocketed. That game was bullshit. It lasted no time at all, but
They made a ton of money.
yeah,
off it.
and
They
it
made
was
a ton of money. Like, I mean,
it's and that's from the Pokemon franchise. That's from this this name, this card game. They built a whole thing around a video game. It was fantastic.
Save D&D.
Yeah.
So
If you want to get
Pokemon obviously is in there. Never played it, and but I learned a few things about it that I didn't know.
Now know something about it.
So the world of video games is obviously very it's very individualistic to whoever is out there.
But,
So
okay, so I said the one game. If you could only play one game, if you were limited to play one game for the rest of your life, you can never play another game. What would be your one game?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know. No, I don't know.
You got to pick though. It's either no video games or a video game.
I would probably play. Oh, I don't. I
You
I
want
don't
to
know.
play your
gotta go.
Hitman with your wife once a year?
Yeah, maybe Hitman.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know.
That's
I
fine.
mean,
that's a good answer.
Ghost Recon might be in there too. I really like that.
I'm definitely saying Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3.
Okay. How about you?
Dominions 4.
Okay. So there you go.
Yeah,
Actually,
unless
no.
there's a 5
I would probably play Call of Duty because I really did like Call of Duty when that came out.
Which one? First one?
I liked a few of them. So
So the final answer, Call of Duty?
yeah, or I could play Splinter Cell too because that was that was kind of cool. Anyway, so as you can see,
See, we could do another hour.
we're ending up here. So I really appreciate you guys sitting down and totally geeking out. We didn't talk about lots of games that are out there. We know that there's Space Invaders people liked, Donkey Kong, which I absolutely hate.
No, but please, like, comment and like fill us in. Like, let's, like, if you give us something back, we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, but everyone's got something different.
of
Like we didn't
PC,
mention
DVD.
Tetris, right?
Oh,
I
that's
fucking
true.
hated Tetris. It just
bullshit.
but it was good as a mind stimulation to try to move things around. So there is tons of stuff. There's things that came out like Zelda. We didn't really talk about. We didn't talk about Contra, which was a big one. And he was talking
Pinball
about
games. We did tons of different things.
Jason was talking about fighting games, and Mike Tyson came out with Punch Out, and that was a classic back then, right? Super Mario Brothers. Never liked Super Mario or any of the Mario Brothers.
Mario never worked for me.
Overrated.
Overrated.
Except for Super Smash Bros.
Never heard of it.
So there you go. Sonic the Hedgehog was a huge one.
Yeah,
Mortal Kombat was a big one that came out. We talked about Doom a little bit. That was groundbreaking. Myst, which we only briefly mentioned, was also a huge one out there. Then you had SimCity, which was massive, right?
That was dumb.
But then there was some really good ones that came out that I really liked playing, which was Star Wars. Star Wars had a whole
TIE
series.
Fighter.
TIE Fighter,
Oh,
right?
my God.
Oh, yeah.
See, I'm mentioning these. I'm kind of going through some of the lists.
Red Baron. Oh,
Right, see these. Command and Conquer was another one that was out there. And then Duke Nukem came out. That was another 3D shooter that came out. So tons of stuff. So we really appreciate you guys listening to the Torvus podcast. This was episode 11, where we tackled oh my goodness,
it was broad. It was a broad,
the very broad world of games from the 1970s,
arcade
80s,
games,
90s, and 2000s.
console games. We had PC games. We had late console games.
So next time you tune in, who knows? We'll tackle some other crazy
I'm sure
topic.
we'll retouch electronic games at some point. We'll do board games at some point, card games, role-playing games. There's a lot more to come.
Yeah. So
Stay tuned.
this was the game podcast, I guess, for the Torvus podcast. And as we can say now, game over.